Welcome to the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. I'm Beatrice Chestnut.
And I'm Uranio Paes.
And today we're talking about applying the Enneagram for deep transformational inner work.
Woohoo!
And I think we've done one, maybe two podcasts on, what do we mean when we say inner work with the Enneagram? So in some ways, this is sort of a continuation of that theme that we've talked about before. But we just finished a retreat.
Or more than one.
Or more than one in California.
We're about to start two more.
So we're kind of in the mood or in the atmosphere, the emotional, spiritual, psychological atmosphere of witnessing really powerful examples of people using the Enneagram for deep transformative inner work. And I'm feeling probably mostly very inspired. Now, of course, we won't talk about any individuals because everything that happens at a retreat is confidential, highly confidential. So we won't be using examples of people, but we will be referring to experiences that we had. I think both in general, what we mean by inner work and giving examples of what we thought was particularly inspiring in a kind of philosophical, theoretical, slightly abstract, but also using specific examples. And I think we'll also talk about ourselves and the inner work we're doing, because I think whenever we do retreats, it's not just about us leading and teaching others and doing inner work. It's like we can't really do it without looking at ourselves, looking in the mirror ourselves, and walking the talk and noticing what comes up in us in response to the really courageous things people do when they're doing the Enneagram and inner work.
Right. I think this is the most important thing that there is. And it's endless. So I hope we record many podcasts on it.
Yes.
And as you said, the retreats are incredible experiences. We do it for highly capable students, and many come to the retreats as beginners, but mostly sometimes beginners on the Enneagram, but having some journey that they have engaged with so far.
Right.
Or when they are in special moments, going deep in their inner transformation, regardless of for how long they've been doing it.
Right.
And I think that it's super inspiring for us to see their work, and we are truly participants in it, facilitators, participants. We do some teaching, we do some approaches that I believe come from a lot of experience. And by the way, we also did recently 2 professional workshops.
Mm-hmm.
And online, yeah. And so I think it's super important to talk about this. Mm-hmm. And I just want to say, we did all of those in California, where we stayed for 5 weeks. And now we arrived in London, and we arrived a few hours ago.
So we're a little casual.
Yes, and also as we are in actuality.
And some of us might be as yet unshowered.
Yeah. Okay, but you smell good. Yeah. So yeah. So
we'll have to take your word for that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we can start. Would you like to say something first? Would you like me to go?
I think you can start us off. I was going to say something about the general topic by way of introduction, but maybe it's the jet lag, but I think it's not with me anymore. So go ahead. I'm sure I'll remember once you start talking.
Okay, B. Yeah, so what we witness and search for during our retreats, SCP Enneagram Academy, is transformation, which means not taking the Enneagram as a theory of personality. So there are a few levels that I would go through. One is the theory. Hi, Kito. Come here with me. Yeah, my boy. Okay, okay, good. So it's not only a theory of behavioral traits.
Right.
Actually, this is not what the Enneagram is.
Right.
And but even if we go to something deeper, which is the motivation behind the typical behaviors of personality types, that's just to describe what we end up being after disconnecting from essence. And I know that you will help us define a little bit these terms, maybe inner work, essence, a bit more in a minute, just to finish. And but then we go to another level, which is getting out of this state of personality, which has to do with limited awareness, and exploring higher levels that in which the types totally transform, but not only transform, but also become the opposite.
Right.
And maybe in a minute I can share a little bit of one of our first speeches in one of these retreats, talking about what the nine types really are.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't, we're not going to talk about specifically what we do because I think it's good if it remains mysterious
Sure.
for people who haven't yet experienced that and are thinking they might at some point. But I do think it's important to know that some people show up without really knowing what they're getting themselves into. But I think what really unites the people there that come to these retreats, and we have 3 inner work retreats. We used to have them in a series of A, B, and C. We've kind of we're moving away from the A, B, and C partly because we've decided you don't have to take them in that order. You can take A or B as a first step. You can do A and then B, or B and then A, but then C has to come before A and B.
After, not before.
C has to come after A and B, but you can do B and then A. So we've been now calling what we used to call Retreat A the experiential Enneagram, and what we used to call Retreat B or the transformative Enneagram. Now we're calling that the psychological Enneagram because a lot of what we do there is really list out all the psychological work you have to do connected to the Enneagram in order to move beyond the personality, to move to higher levels of consciousness. And then Retreat C, what used to be called Retreat C, we're still calling it the alchemical Enneagram, which is more spiritual. But I think, so I'm just kind of laying the groundwork just to help people understand a little bit about the context about what we particularly do in our Enneagram school, which I think is different than other people do in their other Enneagram schools. And I think it's good to have a diversity of approaches in the Enneagram community. And I noticed myself thinking about, what I think was sort of the foundational work that we experienced when we went through the narrative school training. Of course, started and in many ways, defined by Helen Palmer and David Daniels. And I think a lot of their work focused on kind of the building blocks of of recognizing what self-observation is all about and building the muscle of developing a stronger inner witness.
Yeah.
And
super important work.
exactly, it's just the fundamental, in some ways, experience or exercise or practice that we all need to learn to do when we're really understanding what self-observation is all about, and developing that witnessing consciousness that watches what the personality is doing, and by watching without judging starts to create that separation between the true self, which might be sort of an outgrowth of the inner witness, and the false self, or the personality. And of course, I think one of the kind of basic ideas we start from is we are not our personality, that you learn about your personality to learn about what you are not. And so in our retreats, and in the one we just did, which is the one that's most with me, it's formerly called Retreat A, now called the Experiential Enneagram, it's very much about experiencing not only what the Enneagram types are or how they play out when if we look at the personalities as patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving, and deeply ingrained habits or kind of inner programming, but how to be in that, see it to the point where we can start to move beyond it and enter into an experience of shifting out of that. And I think using the basic foundational work of developing an inner witness, noticing what we do, hopefully without criticizing ourselves, and beginning to make some sort of movement beyond it, whether it's looking at a trauma and how we need to defend against that trauma, and how the defenses we use to defend against the pain of our traumas are shaped like our Enneagram type patterns. The Enneagram types are defensive self structures. So when we do this work in different ways, depending on who we're working with and what their history and biography is and what they're bringing to the table in that moment, we find ways to help them have an experience of moving out of the personality, of um, moving out of the defensive self structure that is the personality, so that they can experience more clearly what the personality is, and when they're kind of stuck in it or devolving because of it, and when they are doing something that will help them move beyond it or help them release, or as Helen Palmer used to say, you just let the personality drop at some point if you're doing good inner work. So yeah, and of course that happens in many different ways for different people. But I think I want to say one more thing, and then I want to hear more of what you have to say. I think one of the things that has sort of developed that I didn't know was going to happen, like going in, like this wasn't necessarily my conscious intention, but what happens is the power of the group that comes together at the retreat becomes this kind of magical force, or X factor, or added um, uh, dynamism, energy that helps all of us um, go farther than we would have by ourselves, just at home reading a book or doing our meditation practice. And I think what unites the people that end up coming to our retreats, it's not for everyone. I'm definitely not here saying everybody should come do it. I think you need to have a call to do it. And I think what part of what makes the retreat experience so powerful is a group of people with a common intention to really move beyond the personality, to really see it for what it is, without judging themselves, learning to have more compassion for themselves, but also learning what the ego is and what needs to be confronted and let go of and worked against and shifted out of. And there are different ways of doing that, and it looks different for different types, and again for people with different histories. But I think what's kind of amazing is the different ways that happens, but always totally dependent on someone's strong conscious intention to do the work. And sometimes that's a conscious intention to feel whatever pain needs to be felt, even though of course no one wants to feel pain, or face whatever patterns that have been unconscious that need to be faced, or recognize that they didn't really fully process something from their past that they thought they did, that they hoped they did, but that they still have more work to do. And in a supportive community, being able to really define what work needs to be done in the moment, and then have the courage to open up to that and take a risk. Sometimes it's compared to sort of being on the edge of a cliff or on the edge of an abyss, and having the faith and the courage to kind of jump off into the unknown. And again, so much can happen when people come together with that common intention.
Right. Yeah, and for a determined moment of inner work and a desired degree of depth, It's really important to be in a group,
Yeah.
um, and that also needs to be complemented before and after with individual therapy,
Right.
and also spiritual direction and individual practices.
Right.
However, I want to point out something here that I think speaks to a central key of inner work. While self observation is definitely central, it's not enough. And I think that sometimes we're made to believe as if it was enough. And first, I want to define self observation because not many people know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Self observation is different from self reflection.
Mm-hmm.
Self reflection is when we understand a pattern we've been having, when we look back and say, oh, I do this. Oh, wow, I come from that.
Mm.
And that is self reflection. But self observation is the capacity to be completely present to what's happening right now and watch as a witness, and in ways that are accepting but willing to go beyond, also non judgmental and relaxed. So it has to do with a meditative state
Mm-hmm.
in the inside. And although this is central, it's not enough. Why? Because we cannot do inner work only being gentle. If we are serious about inner work, we need to be gentle first, befriend the personality, and accept ourselves. But if we stop there, we will be stuck in achieving a well-being, and we will be stuck in achieving a certain level of psychological healing, and maybe having a little bit of spiritual
Or a
experiences.
little more self-understanding.
Yeah, but then many people lack the necessary challenging of ego.
Mm-hmm.
So we see students and then ourselves also
Yes.
challenging our dominant instinct, really doing something about that,
Mm-hmm.
our repressed instinct, doing something about it, and also getting in touch with unconscious shadows behind both
Mm-hmm.
and working on the shadows. So
Mm-hmm.
we do work on the
Mm-hmm.
retreat. So we dedicate half an hour to an hour per student, doing individual approaches that help them identify the one thing that is popping up for them during the retreat, and how we and what they can do in practice about
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we help them with
Right.
that,
Right.
with the support of the group
Right. In different ways.
in
In
different
different
ways.
approaches.
Yes, using different techniques, and many times organizing first, not only between us, but also with staff therapists that we always have with us to support the students. And it's never a big group of students, because we aim to do deep individual work in the collective environment that everybody will benefit from.
Mm-hmm.
But then my point is, we need to challenge ego and do something that goes against ego.
Right.
And sometimes it's the instinct part, sometimes it's the subtype pattern,
Yeah.
sometimes it's the passion of type, other times it's the fixation. And many times these things are just behind the main issue,
Right.
which can be a trauma, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so beautiful to see how, in this kind of environment, the unconscious shows the person what they couldn't see before.
Right.
And we help also unveil this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the unconscious shows us only what we are ready to work on,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then, as I was saying, we witness that what each type really is.
Mm-hmm.
So, in short, really short, the aids show and discover how much they are sweet, mellow, even
Sensitive.
sensitive, super, um, um, super nice people, really, when they are getting close to essence. And nines get really strong, even confrontational, and many
Powerful.
times revolutionary and powerful.
Yeah.
The ones get really relaxed and,
Mhm.
going with the flow and enjoying
Funny.
things, funny, and but mostly serene
And
instead of
sometimes
anger.
sexy and fiery.
Angry, yeah, yeah. And then choose, get more, go more inside with a better experience of themselves, and achieving a beautiful state of not needing other people's approval, and being okay and feeling enough, and balancing all the centers, coming not only from the heart. Then threes are by far the most sensitive when they do inner work, because look, we go to the very opposite, and that very opposite is who we really are. We've been living a farce.
Mhm.
Actually, this is what the nine personalities are. It's who we are not, right? And then we see, I mean, witnessing people in their real selves, closer to their real selves, is, I mean, it's such an honor. And fours become very stable, very much in the present moment, without noticing what's missing. It's being okay with what's present, and also not comparing.
Having a kind of inner calm.
Yeah, and equality. And then fives become very intense, connected through bringing up their opinions right away, and even, confronting a bit in good ways. Good
And
ways.
getting more emotional in some
More
cases.
emotional, and definitely more instinctive.
More
Going
intense.
going for practice and relationships and connection before theory and thoughts and withdrawal. Sixes become amazingly strong, and also courageous, going for things with an open heart without planning too much ahead. And then finally, sevens, focus. They come from a newly acquired capacity to be with that one thing that matters and to the end, without opening new avenues, and being super serious, committed, and there for themselves, facing what needs to be faced, even if it's sadness and pain or suffering. So the nine types become completely inspiring. And actually, this is not a becoming, it's a remembering
Mhm.
of who we are.
It's an unveiling
Yes.
or an allowing
Yeah.
of the truth, of more of the truth. And it's
Yeah.
amazing how you fall in love with people when
Yeah.
they're doing this work and they're so open and committed and present and there for everyone else and themselves, in a way that really creates. And I think when you say self-observation isn't enough, it's, I think what we're going for, if we're doing true Enneagram work, is a revolution,
Yeah.
really, in transformation, in really changing from what we are not, from thinking, from mistakenly believing that we are a personality and just being in our personality, to really seeing it for what it is,
Yeah.
which is sort of the outer shell,
Right.
not all of who we are, just something that actually keeps us from being who we really are.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I think to become who we really are, you really need to push against
Right.
that, not only observe it, I think is
Mm-hmm.
what you're saying really
Yeah.
well, and
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 all.
experience the pain that the personality is designed to keep us from feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And once we can kind of consciously suffer, as they sometimes say, as part of the hero's journey, then the personality's reason for being
Right.
becomes less
Yeah.
less important, because we don't need a defense against our deepest pain. We're willing to walk into it and feel it and be supported in it, so that we can walk through it to the other side, and it becomes something that's not something we're avoiding anymore.
Right. And I love when we see the expansion into spiritual realms after people do a healing work that's more
Mm,
psychological.
yeah,
You know, combining psychology and spirituality is really what also the Enneagram is about
yeah,
when dealt in with the necessary depth.
right.
And I want to ask you about this because, as a psychotherapist,
Hmm.
potentially you could have been more, you could be only dedicated to the
Hmm.
psychological health.
Right.
But you also come from a perspective of going beyond
Mm,
personality and achieving spiritual realms. So, what touches you in that
yeah.
during retreats?
Yeah, it's interesting. You're reminding me that a long time ago, when I was first becoming a therapist, um, I had an intuitive reading, and this intuitive said to me, she said, "Please, please don't just do straight psychology. Don't just do straight psychotherapy. Like, go beyond that, mix in the spiritual." I even went to a school that was about Western psychology and Eastern spiritual traditions, and how they fit together really beautifully when you're on a personal growth path. So yeah, I just find it incredibly inspiring and moving.
Yeah.
Everybody's work, no matter where they are on their path. Sometimes it's someone who's a little bit newer to using the Enneagram for deep transformative inner work. And so they're just realizing something super important. And, like a two who's just realizing that they don't know what they need at all, and they've never even asked the question, and they've just been really in this mode of focusing on others, and just haven't really allowed themselves to ask for help or be supported. An eight that's just realizing that there's this vulnerable part of themselves that they avoided, and are not sure they want to allow in, a nine who is, all about peace and avoiding conflict, who suddenly gets a really big, sense of how much energy and power they have inside them if they can allow themselves to be angry and allow themselves to put themselves in the picture more centrally. So I just find it incredibly inspiring to see people kind of rise to the challenge. And I think that's sometimes what we do is we get to know people a little bit, and then um, you know going both from a knowledge of their type and subtype, but also getting to know them a little bit as people. We kind of pose a challenge,
Yeah.
is kind of, I think, what we do. We say, here's what we see your challenge is, and this time, I think, more than any other retreat, I kept wanting to phrase it as an invitation. Here's the
Mhm.
invitation
Yeah.
that we suggest you see right now in your life. And what if you were to take the invitation and do this and this, and do it right now, with your fellow people of your same type, and the rest of the people who are there participating. What if you allowed yourself to have an experience of change,
Mhm.
of going against the ego, of confronting this pattern that you have, and feeling what that feels like, including any pain that comes up, or freedom from it, and so I think that's what we offer, and I think what we're also inspired to do ourselves, and I know that for me, even just you being in California for the last few weeks, and some of the challenges you pose to me along the way, just in everyday life,
And vice versa.
were really, you know, it's like we don't, and this is something Gurdjieff said, we don't see what we're doing, the sort of what we call normal, and it becomes so familiar and so comfortable. We don't question it. we just keep doing it. And until we do something different, or even have something suggested that's different, we don't, it's like we don't realize how we've been limiting ourselves. Like, I mean, to take sort of a silly example, you really pushed me to go to an automobile um, uh, sales lot and look at buying potentially a really nice car, like a much nicer car than I had ever imagined owning. Like I just, and it made me realize, wow, I've just kind of had this tunnel vision. I mean, part of it is the self-pres thing of, oh, maybe I can't afford it, or it's like I really saw that I had this lack of imagination and kind of around having something nice in my life, or having something I might enjoy. It's almost like getting a little bit used to living with limitation or being, and again, whether I buy the car or not in the end is not the issue. It's the fact that I never even thought about that,
Right.
and actually getting me to go there and sit in the car and take a test drive and talk to the guy as if I might be buying it. It was like, wow, this is such a stretch out of my comfort zone, but it's not that, like, it's not that unusual a thing that people do that,
Yes. Yes.
even if they can't afford it, and it was so interesting to me how it sort of shifted this sense of, oh, I get sort of, and I think it's very much based, I think it a lot comes from being self-preservation dominant. And then to also to some extent the subtype, the self-preservation too, but
Mhm.
also just being a human stuck in my patterns.
Yeah.
I think all of those things. And there were several things that you did, just to say, and you were pushy about it, which is good because I needed that, because I would push back at first.
Mhm.
And I just sort of feel this sort of shift, a little bit like this tectonic shift in me, to sort of a greater capacity to ask the question more often: when am I looking at a situation in a much more limited way than I could? And that's been something that has been how I've been sort of applying to many different things since you,
Yeah.
as my very good friend, sometimes pushy friend,
Mhm.
um, helped me do. And that's one example of many I could give of my own, and again, being inspired also by seeing other people do their work.
Yeah. And likewise, completely. I feel the same with you. And this is yet another principle of inner work that we see happening when we
Hmm.
do deeper Enneagram work,
Right.
which is get together with people who push your bottoms a bit and who
Buttons.
buttons, not
Not
bottoms.
bottoms, yeah.
Yeah, yes, who push your buttons and
Buttons.
buttons. Oh my god.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes. Or
Uh,
I mean, push your buttons, but also just push you,
yeah. Yeah.
in a loving way. And
Yeah.
again, I think it's like we really stress the idea of cultivating friends on the path
Right.
in our
And
retreats, and we're trying to create a community. And whether it's people who come to our retreats or just people who see an event we do or listen to the podcast, um, I think what we're trying to do is help people get together with other people, which in some ways is an answer to, I think, what's going on in our world right now, which is an epidemic of disconnection, and things like high suicide rates and um, and addiction and all kinds of human problems that are happening. It's so much right now, I think, are a big function of the fact that we're all stuck in our personalities, and that ends up making us more isolated and doing things on our own. And so I think people have a great experience when they work with the Enneagram and take the invitation to do this work with other people. I mean, you have to do it with other people. It's
right.
absolutely necessary. And I think that's another thing. I feel like every time we do a retreat, it's just been amazing. The people that come and the bonds that they make. It's astonishing, because I think that's what enables the work to continue.
Right. And it's not about the car only. The car is nice, but it's more about inner work. And for some people, it's going for a car. For others, it's the opposite.
Right.
It's more like going to a discomfort zone. And if we don't do that, we will take inner work a bit more as a theory
Yeah.
and as something that we believe we are doing something about, but we are not. We are just getting a bit distracted by the Enneagram.
Right. And it's amazing all the different things that can prove to be uncomfortable. Like going to the car lot and taking a nice car for a test drive was incredibly uncomfortable for me, and I was even surprised at how uncomfortable it was. But for other people it could be like for a 3, it's so hard to slow down and pamper themselves and not work for a while. Or there, for all the types there are different things. For 5s to say more how they're feeling in front of people,
Or
connected to
even
people
to
in the moment,
expand the horizons,
to
not
take in
going for
abundance.
less.
Exactly. All the types have these things that they just don't allow themselves to do out of habit. And if you have someone with a lot of support and care pushing you in that direction, it's like I'm remembering the thing that Gurdjieff used to say, that I mean, a very simple thing he would say: if you want to know how you walk, walk differently, like walk funny one day, just to see what normal is like. um, but of course there is no normal, but it's what you got used to, what you've become accustomed to, and finding ways to go deeper than those habitual patterns usually allow you to, through
Right.
challenge and discomfort and sometimes pain.
Right. By the way, this is Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff. It's this is a painting by my son from a few years ago. My son, who's an artist, and we use different backgrounds like Gurdjieff, Sufism, and even Christian contemplative tradition. A lot of psychological
It's
methods.
hard for me not to talk about Dante most of the time as an
Hmm.
example, because he creates such a beautiful artistic rendering of the path of spiritual transformation.
Right. Yeah, and each person needs something different.
Right.
Although there are 9 types, there are billions of individuals. And by the way, by the end of this year, and this is 2022, we'll reach 8 billion people on Earth.
Wow.
And so there are 8 billion different
Mm.
people on Earth.
Mm.
Um, so, and it's interesting to see how people get mirrored by others, supported by others in a group context, and presence is absolutely crucial.
Right.
So presence is something that we should do an episode about, I guess.
Mhm.
And well, I won't go on here about that, but that requires being on the 3 centers of intelligence.
Right. And I think one of the things that I always learn a lot about is when we talk about the head types and the body types and the heart types, and what their different experiences are like, and watching them do their inner work in different ways. And of course, the subtype patterns and how you need the subtypes to really do the deep inner work,
Yeah.
like working with social 7s. Every time people are astonished, like how is this not a 2? But they're really not a 2. And when you really hear stories about the sacrifice, or how that plays out, how that other focus, that taboo on selfishness, you
Yeah.
learn so much, not only just about the Enneagram types, but about how to apply that knowledge about the types to
Right.
create real change.
Yeah. So it's really not only about understanding the patterns. We really believe in walking the talk during retreats. But what we want to emphasize is not our retreats only, but what we hope that
Yeah.
that you, our listener, can understand the Enneagram is truly about.
Right.
It's a map to take us from point A to point B, which is a higher level of awareness. And if we don't commit to doing things that are very specific in our development,
Yeah.
then it becomes just talk.
And um, going from point A to point B, sometimes point B is something that we didn't know to aspire to.
Mm-hmm.
It's like part of this is aiming higher.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think part of being in personality is we don't see what we could accomplish if we tried. And of course, I think everyone who gets interested in the Enneagram, I think one of the things that I love about it is like when I've done like short-term coaching with people, often it's like, okay, I know my type, so what do I do now? So really coming together and seeing how different people's paths can get mapped out by the Enneagram.
Right, right.
It's like, because you experience this in your life and you're this type and subtype, that it's important for you to do this right now. And then after you do this, it'll be important to do that, and to know what the this and the that is. Because, otherwise, like I would always say when I was in my training to become a psychotherapist, I would look at my fellow, student therapists, and I would say, how are you doing this without the Enneagram? Because while I think, of course, therapy can happen without the Enneagram, good therapy, it's like a big shortcut. It saves time. It makes it more efficient, because there's a way that as a psychotherapist, it takes a while to get to know someone, and you enter into their world and you kind of help them make sense of it. But with the Enneagram as a sense making framework, it just helps map out the growth steps and help really take those steps, as opposed to, I know for me, sometimes I mean, I've known the Enneagram for most of the time, most of my adult life. But it would be sometimes like, what's the work here? You could be with that question for a long time with some people, because again, we're sometimes defending against knowing what our growth path is because we're scared to take it. But I think the Enneagram really helps map that out. And again, like you said, not only the psychology of it, but the spiritual potential of it.
Yeah.
Once you do that psychological work, you just start experiencing more expansion. You start experiencing new things. And I think sometimes people like don't have the imagination to understand what they could allow for or move into in a positive way.
Yeah.
I think people defend against painful experiences, but sometimes they also unconsciously defend against positive experiences.
Mhm.
Fives being one example, like being overwhelmed by abundance, and
Mhm.
playing small. Different types do that. So I think all the types have different ways they can kind of stay in a small structure
Right.
and not go beyond that. And I think it's important when we're working with the Enneagram to know that what Enneagram's all about is
Yeah.
moving beyond the personality, with a lot of ambition. I think
Mhm.
sometimes people can lack ambition, or they feel lost. They don't really know what the direction is. But I think the Enneagram helps us really have that experiential growth, that I think a lot of people long for, but don't always know how to find. And again, it's not about our retreats. It's about using the Enneagram in whatever setting you're in. It could be in your relationships, in coaching, in spiritual direction, in your spiritual life, with a group that you're in. I think all of these can be usefully combined with the Enneagram to make more progress than I think sometimes we think we're capable of. And again, I think it's part of the whole, what the Enneagram tells us is that we are asleep, that when we're in personality, it's a kind of sleepwalking, and we need to do something to really move out of that. We need to take a lot of action. We need to have the will to change and then impose our will on ourselves and our that part of ourselves that wants to stay asleep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And another thing that I consider to be essential in going deeper with the Enneagram, doing self development work, is to welcome new sorts of pain and
Mm,
things that break our hearts. It means for some getting in touch with trauma, for others it's existential pain. And on the path, we always need to meet three scary friends, which are loneliness, later on a more existential fear, and then emptiness in
mhm,
different stages of self development.
mhm.
And what we see in our students who are truly doing inner work is that they need to go deep into what's not working, in pain, and then they have a more full experience of the human drama and saga, and their own journeys. And all of these stages have to do with truly being on a hero's journey.
Right.
And then only by doing that, there will be more sustainable expansions of consciousness and awareness shifts. When we do serious inner work, we need right now to talk about spiritual realism, which is knowing that it's not true what many self-help authors try to seduce us with, which is, seeing light too fast. We need to know that it's hard work. We need to talk seriously about that. It's about time. I'm so happy that younger people today, millennials, they understand this message more. They don't want more of the same, and they are really willing. Not all, but many, willing to go inside and discover real limitations they have. So, doing inner work with the Enneagram should not be, in my view, about drawing a table of strengths and weaknesses
Challenges.
or
Yeah.
challenges.
Yeah.
It's not that. Also, because 9 out of 10 of these tables classify as strengths things that are actually ego.
Right.
and
Right.
and sometimes I don't think that it helps much when we talk about things like superpowers that each of us have, because I don't like that, because I think this makes us trust too much our own ego.
Right.
Because people don't really talk about what comes next as a superpower, which is essential states, like we talked about for the 9 types.
Right. And you and I have different styles. I do in the very beginning when I'm working with people, especially in a business setting, talk about strengths and challenges, because I think people need to have their strengths affirmed in order to open up to the challenges.
Yeah, I
But then I
agree.
focus on
I
growth
also do
and
that a
development.
bit, and in our new test, the CPS Compass, we definitely
Right.
show that. It's not that I'm criticizing doing that in the beginning.
Right.
What I'm saying is that for the theme of this podcast, which is going deeper, doing inner work with the Enneagram, that needs to go. That needs to be more contextualized, really, for the beginning.
Yeah.
And we need to be serious about looking at shadows, looking at ways that we have been living away from who we really are.
Maybe we could wrap up this podcast by saying one or two things that we're working on. Not that our inner work is such the greatest example of all, but more just what we're realizing, just to maybe make it a little more personal and by way of giving more examples.
Well, in my case, when facilitating people's inner work, I am being less and less, and tell me if this word exists in English, interventionist. Like
Yeah.
doing more of an approach that I go there and do things, and being much more present and vibrating more in light than really just want to help people deal with deep shadows, which I used to do before. And the second thing,
So
for
let me just
me,
say, define that a little bit more, for people who don't know you as well as I do. I think it's about, and I think a lot of us can do that, like psychotherapists, healers, people who work with people as a practitioner. We work too hard.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was a psychotherapist and I was in consultation, so I would go to someone every week who I would talk about my cases and she would help me, sort of as a teacher guide. After every week at the end of the session, I would always say to myself, oh, so again, the thing I need to learn is I'm working too hard. Right. So I think we can work too hard either by thinking we need to do more for the person that really they're probably better off doing for themselves, or that we have to kind of be sort of uh, the the hero, and again, usually unconsciously, not in a conscious way, or thinking that we have to do something extra for them in order for our work to have value, when I think sometimes less is more. And so I think that you're getting better and better at being yourself and being in your heart,
Mhm.
and sort of loving people into growth, as opposed to, doing some, extra hard work.
Right, exactly. And then uh, dealing more with simplicity in a few ways and with a lot of care in everything, including myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that leads me to my second piece of work I've been doing, which is in my instinctual sequence as a social dominant and self-pres repressed.
Mm-hmm.
So in the past, I think I was way more um, coming from a big instinctual need to belong,
Mm-hmm.
and it's less now. And I try to see all the times that that happens.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still big in a few important aspects of my life, like as an immigrant, a Brazilian living here in the UK. And I have dreams and dreams and dreams that I have to work on that in therapy with friends like you. And it's a lot about allowing or not allowing myself and feeling part of or not. And it's a process. I'm doing better, feeling more joy, and then it comes a better drive for self-care and being with myself and feeling okay. And by the way, I think an important thing for me, but for everybody, is to exchange happiness for joy. And
Mm.
joy has to do with being in peace with ourselves, with nature, and with God, or the absolute, or totality.
Mm.
But
Mm-hmm.
what about you, B? What
Mm-hmm.
would be two things that you've been working on and that you notice in yourself during all these retreats?
I think so one piece of work that feels never ending, and hopefully it gets better someday, is seeing how much the the dominance of my self preservation instinct limits me. I just think it's almost like with me all the time, part of the way I think. And it's like too much worry, too much effort, too much trying to control things, too much seeing things in slightly negative ways that don't need to be seen in negative ways, like what could go wrong, or what there is to be afraid of when there's really nothing to be afraid of. And just seeing how it kind of makes me play small, which is a little
Mm,
bit this subtype, this self-preservation 2 subtype, like limited goals or limited imagination.
right.
And so just really seeing the effect of that and trying to really, again, without judging myself, just go, okay, what would it be like to just relax that more, open up more, leave more space for that not being there so much.
Yeah.
And I think to a lesser extent, maybe the repressed sexual instinct. I noticed in this last retreat, I noticed that sometimes I can be shy in ways that I don't see. And so making a little bit more of a point of it, like connecting more one on one, even though we don't have a lot of time in retreats, like making like it breaks, or just to really connect with particular people and bring a little more of myself to the more personal in between time interactions. Um, and then what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, I think something you've been helping me with, I think I may have mentioned before, but trying to be less emotional.
Mm,
And again, for a long time, I, needed to fight for my emotions being valid and important and not devalued by others mostly. But I think now I can go to too much of an emotional reaction, like too strong, too much of the time, that kind of takes me out of presence and out of um, just a more balanced way of approaching things, experiencing life. So trying to really be a little bit more in my belly or a little more in my head, or just turn the volume down, or just ask myself, okay, is there a way that I can leave some space to lessen the intensity of this emotion right now? Because it's just a reaction.
Mhm.
And so I think I'm sort of working on that, like almost trying to hold a larger space for what I'm experiencing, so I can um, just be with it more and not get carried away with the unconscious reaction.
Right. Yes, very important work. And I hope we have inspired a little bit you or a listener or viewer to think of your next steps in deeper inner work with the Enneagram.
So now I think it's time for our top five. And I'm going to spring something on you that we haven't talked about.
Oh, wow.
Because I know
I
you
thought
like
we were doing a
spontaneity.
break and editing just so that I could reflect. That's a challenge. Okay,
I
let's
know
go.
you like to go with the flow.
Let's go.
So here, but tell me what you think of this. I was thinking for our top five today, we could do the top five types or subtypes that are most likely to get taken in by conspiracy theories.
Oh, okay.
What do you think?
I like doing this.
Because there's a lot of conspiracy thinking going on in the world today.
Good.
And I just think some types are more susceptible than others. And I think it might be interesting for us to maybe on the fly kind of talk about our top five most likely to get, maybe most suggestible.
Yeah,
I don't know if we've done
yeah,
that, but especially when it comes to conspiracy thinking.
Right? Let's go.
All right.
You start because you have certainly prepared more than I have.
Okay, not much more. Not
Okay,
much
yep.
more. Okay. So my number five would be type 2, actually.
Mm.
And I don't think twos are the top of the list when it comes to conspiracy thinking, but I do think that they can get swayed by people when they have a strong relationship with them. Like if they really want to connect with someone, or with others that are, thinking a certain thing, they can think that thing along with them. And so almost like wanting to, it's sort of like the motivation is wanting to connect,
Mm.
but they can get into a kind of a group think or a conspiracy think, way of thinking. And I think one of the reasons why today in the world people get taken in by conspiracies is through wanting to connect with others, because we have this crisis of disconnection. But that's what I would say is twos. I think they can tell themselves a story too, and believe the story, especially again if important people that they're connected to are also uh, thinking that same story.
Good.
What about you?
I think my fifth is either 4 or 7. I mean, a doubt here, maybe a draw.
Mm.
I see in practice many sevens that I met going for conspiracy theories, and that in the beginning I found that curious
Mm-hmm.
because I would assume they were less prone to that. It's just
Mm-hmm.
empirical. And I think that fours have an intensity, an oppositional stance, but I
Mm-hmm.
do not think they are the biggest on this. Anyway, my fifth.
That's your fifth.
What is your fourth?
So my fourth is fours also.
Mm.
A little bit for that same thing. I think sometimes fours, it's like they've got a good imagination, and they can imagine different things.
Mm.
And I think if for some reason there's a reason that they might give their minds over to a particular imagination, maybe it's out of comparing or out of connecting, but again they have good capacities for fantasy. Let's put it that way. You often hear fours say, oh yes, I can really have elaborate fantasies. So I think that capacity in them can sometimes be put to use or get taken over by conspiracy thinking.
Mm. Interesting. I guess my fourth is type 8. I see eights engaging with that more automatically without noticing. Also, a little bit, in my view, from both an oppositional stance that's easy for them to take, and a little bit like the 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 not only the oppositional, the contrarian in them, but the doing something about that and seeing injustice that can be sometimes distorted into seeing that something's wrong while it isn't, and being
Mm-hmm.
a bit radical in their positions, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's more from my empirical, experience, the
Mm-hmm.
sample I have. I've been thinking about people here,
Mm-hmm.
and
Interesting.
in general, I think, and I'm giving away a bit my other things.
Mm-hmm.
I think that hard types are less prone
That's what
to,
I was thinking too. That's
yeah,
why they're 5 and 4 in mine. And
yeah,
I actually, my number 3 is 5.
mm,
I think especially social 5 and maybe sexual. Um, I think self-pres fives are more practical, but I think social fives, again, they can sort of, there may be like certain people they're connected to or a certain intellectual theory of
yeah, yeah,
reality. They're good at being abstract in that way. And sort of, I've seen fives, social fives especially, get really deeply into something,
yeah.
and it could be a way of thinking that gets turned in that way of, oh, there's this thing going on, and it's almost like they've got such a strong mental capacity or mental
Hmm.
ability that it can get, if it gets taken over by something like that, it can kind of go a long way down that
Hmm.
road.
Yeah, five is also my third, and I just see that as a five myself. Sometimes I try to be very creative and in trying to find out what's underneath and explaining something with more
Yes,
sophistication and complexity. And sometimes I
exactly.
engage in the system of thinking. And fives are, not exactly known for being optimists all the time.
Mhm.
So, and there is a little bit of dark humor, or,
Right. You
seeing
could gather
dark.
data to support a certain idea
Right.
potentially. Yeah.
Yeah. but but I think there is a type that is a little above that, which is my second.
Mm,
Ones are, for me, a bit more prone to engage in one form of thought, sometimes
mhm,
not considering all the picture, going with the gut, and
mhm.
reproducing some concepts. And I just see several ones doing that.
Interesting.
What is your second?
My second is 7.
Hmm.
And it's interesting. I think at first you wouldn't think sevens would be get taken in by that kind of thinking, but I have known some sevens in my life that have been that way. And they can
Yeah.
be a bit like, sometimes it's kind of an anarchist kind of
Hmm.
thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes it comes from anxiety.
Yeah.
I've known some self-preservation sevens, especially, that are more on the anxiety side of it, of like they've got an anxiety, or they've got sometimes tied to a self-interest. And so they kind of make something, they tell a story, or it's a rationalization
Yeah.
to kind of rationalize what they want to do or why they're anxious about something. So it stops being anxiety. It's not a feeling now. There's a reason to be anxious because of this thing that's happening, kind of thing. I also think with the sexual sevens, they can be so suggestible. In fact, suggestibility is kind of one of their names.
Right. Yeah.
And we probably have the same number 1,
Type
which is
six.
6.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think they're prone
yes.
to, really seeing what's not visible, what's underneath,
Hidden agendas,
hidden
ulterior
agendas. And
motives.
there is a little bit of a tendency to be more paranoid. And I'm
Right,
not talking about the pathological paranoia,
right.
but there is a tendency to fear
To
more,
think the
to
worst,
question more, think of the
to imagine
worst.
something, to be able to elaborate an
Yeah,
imagined negative scenario that
yeah.
exists out there, and
And I
then
do think that the whole movement of conspiracy theories is very sixish.
yes.
And I see many sixes going through that rabbit hole,
Me too. Me too. And I think sometimes it's a projection. It's a
Yeah,
projection. Like it's a way to explain the fear inside that doesn't get called fear. It's not fear. It's because there's something really happening.
right.
So
Yeah,
I'm just seeing what other people aren't seeing,
right,
and and having the realistic feelings one would have about it.
right.
Yeah.
Nice top five. Well thought. And before we finish, I just want to really thank our members at CP Online, which is our platform with content for members. It's a membership thing. People pay an amount per year, which is reasonable, very reasonable. And we develop much more content going beyond our podcast. If you like our podcast, have a look at the content we offer there. It's almost like our CP Enneagram Netflix,
Right.
like our streaming service with
Right.
lots of videos that we have produced over years and
Webinars. I
webinars every
did
month.
2 interviews with every one of the 27 subtypes, and
Yeah,
that can be a good way to learn the subtypes.
yeah. So check that on our website,
Hmm.
and also thank all of you for listening to our Enneagram 2.0 podcast.
Yes, thank you for listening, and we hope you join us again next time when we talk about all things Enneagram.